Hi, everybody. You're probably looking for Greg Siskind, but he's on a world's adventure. And so in his place, you have me, Elissa Taub, along with my fearless associate, Marshal Garbus. I am coming to you from Memphis in the Arctic South because we are completely frozen over with ice and snow. And Marshall is coming to us from south of the South.
Yeah, over here in New Orleans, holding it down.
Where there isn't, where there's no ice and snow, but they're still trying to keep things from freezing over. So we're glad to be with you tonight, and we will try to fill Greg's ample shoes while he is unavailable this evening. So we're glad you're here with us. Interestingly, this past week, we've not had a ton of immigration news. And I keep saying that with a bunch of trepidation because if you've watched these live streams where I've been on before, there's usually some kind of breaking news about 5 minutes before we go live. And I kept checking the news, and so far tonight, I haven't seen anything. So we're just gonna go with it. So we want to start off with, let's see, we can do our little banner here and show everybody who we are. We're going to start off with a little political rundown tonight, just to kind of give everybody an idea of what's going on with the government. And then we're going to talk about some important lawsuits and decisions that have just come down recently in the last week. And one of them even as recently as today. And so we don't, it'll be a relatively short program tonight, but still important and still a lot to cover. So in terms of politics and government, I don't think that anybody in the United States is unaware of what's been going on in Minneapolis over the last month or so, and just the extreme circumstances that are going on up there. You don't need me to recount that for you because that's been covered in the national news. But what's really interesting is that the goings on in Minneapolis and in the wider Twin Cities region are really creating a backlash against the administration, and they're carrying out of what they say to be immigration enforcement, but really is just like a terror campaign against people of color. And they started this, they did it in Los Angeles, they did it in Portland, they did it in Chicago. Now they're in Minneapolis. And, in each place they've gone, there's been some measure of resistance to these indiscriminate, attacks on immigrant communities. Finally now, people are really starting to get angry about this. And so this past week, a couple of things are really interesting that are happening. First of all, there is a burgeoning movement to impeach Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. She, as the Secretary of Homeland Security, she is the ultimate boss of ICE and Border Patrol. She's also the boss of USCIS, and she's over Homeland Security investigate. Like, there's so many things that she oversees as the Secretary of Homeland Security. And this week, she really came out. She prejudged the horrific murder of Alex Preddy. She and even admitted, I think yesterday, that she's taking orders from Stephen Miller on how she handles things. And, Stephen Miller was not Senate confirmed. He's a civil servant employee. He's not an elected official. And she's like a cabinet secretary, saying that she's taking orders from someone else. So, and not just directly from the president. So a lot of things that are leading for a growing call for her impeachment. Initially, a few weeks ago, there was one Democratic representative in the House who had introduced impeachment articles, and it was like, oh, good, nice try. Glad somebody did it. But now there are lots of folks that are signing on as co-sponsors, and you're hearing more discussion about it. That doesn't mean she's being removed from office tomorrow, but I do think that there also is a growing sense of unease with her in the administration. There were even some rumors in November, December that she might be getting fired. So, we'll watch that and see what happens. I think from the administration's perspective, if they do remove her or if she is removed through impeachment, their challenge is going to be getting somebody new confirmed through the Senate maybe an emboldened or a re-emboldened Democratic caucus in the Senate won't just, rubber stamp the cabinet appointees this time around. So that is very interesting. And then in tandem with that, we're seeing the Democrats say that they are not going to sign off on this round of DHS funding. Now, if you recall, the government shut down in October because the government could not come to a funding agreement. And so October 1st is the beginning of the fiscal year. And so we saw the government shut down for like a month and a half because the two sides couldn't come together on a decision. And that was primarily being held up because of healthcare funding and healthcare subsidies. The government reopened with this agreement that kept the government open until January 30th, which is Friday of this week. And it looked like things were just going to roll into a continuing resolution to keep the government open, for the rest of the fiscal year. And then all of this, craziness erupted in Minneapolis. And now the Democrats are saying, look, we're not going to vote to increase or provide any more funding to the Department of Homeland Security. We want to have some guardrails. We want to have some limits on the power of ICE and Border Patrol for what they're doing. And one thing to note is that a lot of the funding that ICE is currently using, the incredibly huge funding that they have, came out of what the Republicans called the One Big Beautiful Bill that passed last summer. So this funding resolution right now, it's not a fund ICE or defund ICE resolution, but there are some things that the Democrats can do to try to hold this up, to get some concessions and start paving the way to put some shackles on what the Department of Homeland Security is doing. And so that's what this is aimed at. It's unclear right now if the government, if the Democrats continue with this and if the Republicans won't compromise by Friday. There are two ways that this can go. One way is for the whole thing to just be shut down. And the other way is for Congress or the Senate to pass a clean resolution that funds everything but DHS, and then hold out the Homeland Security piece so that they can keep most of the government open, but just hold up the part that has to do with Homeland Security. So we'll see what happens with that. It's Wednesday. I have the feeling that this news is going to, this is going to happen like in the middle of the night between Thursday and Friday, essentially. So stay tuned. If, this is something that I think a lot of us should be paying attention to. We really, from an immigration lawyer perspective, I don't want to see a government shutdown again that affects the Department of Labor, because that is really disruptive on, personally. If I take off my immigration lawyer hat and put it to the side for a second, personally, I'm like, shut it all down, right? Let's get this all, addressed. But I think it would be great if we could keep most of the government up and running but hold out the DHS piece. So we'll see what happens with that. Marshall, do you have anything you want to add on any of that political craziness that's going on?
Not much. I mean, you covered a lot. I think it is interesting to see how just the events of one week can kind of change what's going on in DC to the degree it is. And it's really an unpredictable world we're living in.
It is. And it's really interesting to see this, what feels like a turning of the tide, where you have people that typically would just fall in line with the administration and not really question what they say, take a step back and say, well, wait a minute, I watched that video. I've seen the analysis. I know that why was there such a strong initial urge to say what, to say what happened when you didn't even know. And it turns out that was all wrong. And I think that that's really caused a lot of people who normally would just believe everything this administration says to take a step back and say, well, wait a minute, I need to question this. And that's led in the direction where you have some members of the Democratic Senate caucus who normally, wouldn't necessarily have put up a hard fight saying, yeah, I'm voting against this resolution. So remains to be seen what actually will happen at the end of the day, but it's very interesting to watch. All right. Well, let's get off of our politics thing. I could probably talk about that all night, and nobody wants to hear me talk about that all night. So Marshall, why don't you tell us about a couple of court decisions that came down on the humanitarian side of immigration just recently?
Sure. So this week there was a big decision with regards to the TPS for Burma. For background, we created a TPS program, temporary protected status, for individuals from Burma in 2021, kind of in the wake of the civil war, which had displaced millions of people, and is kind of still an ongoing, pretty violent situation. And in November of 2025, NOAA and DHS decided to terminate the program, which would be effective at the end of January 2026. So that's been litigated, and we just received a new stay of termination that was issued, I think, over the weekend. So that's essentially putting on the termination on pause, and in practice, throughout the continuation of the litigation, the individuals on TPS will continue to be eligible for work authorization and have protection against deportation as the lawsuit continues. So some positive news there.
Definitely. And I think that is really, this particular decision is important, but I think it's also important to show that this administration continues to try to terminate TPS for just about every country for which it's designated as those expirations come up. And time again, we see litigation efforts be successful because the government isn't following the legal protocol for how you terminate TPS. They're doing it out of a sense of cruelty and nastiness and meanness. And while that might make them feel good that they can say mean things, at the end of the day, that's not the legal standard. And so they keep losing in court every time they, not every time, but a lot of the times that they try to terminate TPS. So when we see those terminations in the news, it's important to know that we've got to take it seriously, but also there's a good chance that litigation is going to be successful in the long run. All right. And then what happened on the family reunification parole programs?
So there was a preliminary injunction issued in Svetlana Doe v. Nome on January 24th. That issued a stay on the termination of individuals, I think, already in parole. So anyone that is in the U.S. and received parole terminations and pretty much so another positive development.
Yeah, no, those were two good ones. And I think we have a third bit of litigation news that we just learned about today, where one of our immigration lawyer colleagues, Brian Green, who is immigration federal court litigator extraordinaire, fought the good fight in a case called Mukherjee versus Miller, out in the U.S. District Court for the District of Nebraska, and really got a fantastic decision there in an EB-1 case. So we're kind of leaving the world of humanitarian immigration, talking about TPS and family reunification, coming back over to talk about employment-based immigration. And EB-1 green cards are available to individuals who have extraordinary ability in their fields. And so we use these for athletes and entertainers and artists and business folks who are really at the top of their field, physicians, researchers. I mean, all kinds of folks can benefit from EB-1 green card applications. And for the better part of my career, I filed them exactly the same way. For a long time, there's a list of 10 categories of evidence that tend to show someone is extraordinary at what they do. We have to meet 3 of them. And that's what the law says. And I think, I forget what year it was, maybe 2013-ish.
2010.
2010. Okay. So I didn't want to go back that far, but okay. In 2010, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals came down with a decision in a case called, that we all refer to as Kazarian versus U.S., where a person who had been denied an EB-1 green card by USCIS sued to challenge that decision. And the Ninth Circuit upheld this decision that said, well, really what the government should do is a 2-step analysis. In addition to just looking at whether the person meets 3 out of those 10 categories of evidence, the officers should then take a step back and look at all of the evidence, the totality of the evidence as a whole, and say, does this person seem extraordinary, essentially? And USCIS said, wow, we really like that standard. Now, we immigration lawyers liked Kazarian at first because it also told the government that they couldn't impose novel requirements on the statutory language. They couldn't see, a statute that says you have to, if you've written scholarly articles for publication, that wasn't enough just to have them published, but the Immigration Service would say, well, they had to be published in prestigious journals and you had to have X many of them and, all of that. Kazarian said the government can't do that. If it says the publication of scholarly articles, if you've published articles, that's enough. You've met the criterion. So we liked Kazarian for that part of it initially. But this two-step analysis thing became a real problem when the government started imposing this final merits determination. Does the person seem extraordinary in a really vague way? Even they couldn't really tell you what it meant. But it was very hard to challenge their adoption of that policy under an old Supreme Court precedent known as the Chevron decision, which said that courts have to give a lot of deference to agency decisions. So lots of things going on in EB1 world, and increasing numbers and increasing percentages of denials, and specifically denials on this final merits determination where the government will say, hey, this person met 3 out of those 10 categories, but overall we didn't think they were that great, and they deny the case. And this is something that's been happening with more frequency. And a lot of lawyers on listservs that we're on, are like, what do I have to do to get one of these cases approved? They're really, really hard. So our friend Brian Green challenged the Immigration Service's adoption of this policy under the Administrative Procedures Act and said, look, they shouldn't have been able to just replace their 20 years of policy prior to that and just adopt this new rule and this new rubric. They should have gone and promulgated this as a regulation. They needed to give notice to the public and give the public an opportunity to comment and respond on the pros and cons of this policy. And then they should have formally adopted it as a regulation, not just a memo in the policy manual. And this court, the district court for the District of Nebraska, agreed and issued a really stinging decision today, where not only did they agree, but they agreed forcefully and then remanded the case back to the Immigration Service. And it says in the decision at the end, it says that they remand it back to the Immigration Service to reverse the denial because there is nothing else left for the officer, for the agency to do. That this person so clearly qualified for the EB1 classification that they weren't going to remand for further consideration. They literally remanded for approval. So it's a really fantastic decision. Now, what does it mean? And I think that's the question, right? District court decisions are not binding on the whole country. They're only applicable in that location. Now, the Nebraska Service Center of the Immigration Service is in Lincoln, Nebraska. So that's why this litigation was brought there. But it's not like tomorrow everybody should call their lawyer and say, oh, my EB1 just got easier. We should file it now, right? Like that's not happening. But this decision does give us a great tool to fight back on the Immigration Service when they issue those notices of intent to deny, saying you met 3 categories, but you don't seem that great. It gives us great language to cite on why the agency should not be given deference anymore, because that Chevron decision I mentioned earlier was overturned in the last Supreme Court term in a case called Loper Bright that said that agencies don't get that deference anymore. And this judge took that all the way and scored a touchdown with it. They basically said, like, this decision to implement this decision doesn't get deference because it was done in a way that really they didn't explain why. They changed the rules. And they never said why they were doing it. And they never said what the impact was going to be. They didn't study it. They just did it. And so this decision really gives a lot of fodder to immigration lawyers on EB1 cases going forward on fighting back against bad decisions. And I think that's really the utility. And, it's possible that there may be an appeal from this, maybe not. It's possible that other courts, though, now can look at this, because now that this is out there, litigators in other cases in other jurisdictions can also cite to this case and show judges that they should have the courage to do the same thing. So overall, it is a really fantastic development in EB1 green card world. So we're really happy about that. Marshall, I don't know if you have anything to add about that. Any other thoughts about the decision or how it might impact those cases? Marshall and I both file a fair amount of EB1 cases, so we were just having a great conversation before the show.
Yeah, no, I think the immediate impact is that it does strengthen our footing when we file our initial petitions. Now, I think we've got good language to use in responding to any RFEs, request for evidence, or notice of intent to denies. So I think it puts us in a better position than yesterday. So it's great, and it kind of gives us an avenue for potential litigation and some leverage in that process. So all positive.
Yeah, no, it's really great. I mean, we're not usually, I think over the last year, I think it was almost exactly a year ago that we started doing these live streams. And I can't remember a time when we were like, wow, there's this really great thing that happened today. It almost feels like wrong that we should be like positive about something, but it really, it's very exciting. And so I just can't say enough kudos to Brian. And congratulations on the big win. It's really fantastic. And then I think we really only have like one or maybe one more thing to cover tonight, unless there's been any breaking news while we've been live.
I was just looking it up. I'm checking it real quick, doing a quick scan.
Hopefully not, because I can't take it. I don't think so. But yeah, the only other thing I wanted to mention, because I'm not sure what was covered on prior live streams, and this news came out just in the last few weeks, is that as of March 1st, the Immigration Service is raising its fees for its premium processing service. Marshall, do you have that handy, the numbers? Let's see.
I've got the one for the common I-129s and I-140s. They're currently at $2,805 and $2,965, and that all took effect, March 1st.
Yeah, so the I-140s and the H-1Bs are going, or I-140s and I-129s are going up to $2,965. The I-539s for F, M, and J petitions are going up to $2,075. The OPT-based I-765 premium is going to $1,780. And then for R1 and H-2B cases, premiums going up to $1,780. These jumps aren't huge, like $2,805 to $2,965 is not a huge jump, but I think the overall, and they tie this to inflation, right? So on the one hand, like the president wants to tell us there's no inflation, and yet they're like, oh, we need to raise these fees because of inflation. Oh, and by the way, you're getting the same service that you were getting already. Like, we're not getting anything more. So that, I remember when I first started practicing immigration law, premium processing was $1,000. And then it went to $1,225. Then it went to like 19 something. Then they finally broke the 2,000 barrier, right? So it keeps going up. And now we're almost at $3,000, in a span of 20 years. Maybe that doesn't seem like a lot, but $3,000 when you're, maybe the whole filing fee is $3,000. Now you're like doubling up what you have to pay the government to file a petition, because if you don't file with premium, who in the heck knows how long it's going to take to get a decision? Premium used to come along with better benefits too. You used to have a dedicated phone line you could call. Those work intermittently. We do get email. We can email them, so that still works. They used to fax us RFEs or noise or decisions. They don't do that anymore, and they don't email them either. You have to kind of beg them for them to email you an RFE so you can get it faster. So here you are paying almost $3,000 for faster service. They issue a request for evidence on your case, and they stick it in the regular mail. And they do the same thing with your approval notice. They used to allow you to send them a FedEx envelope so that you could get them to FedEx back your premium processing approval notice. They stopped that several years ago. And so now you're waiting on regular mail to get the approval notice so that you can send it to your client to have them travel back to the US. So we're paying more money for premium. We're getting less service. And in at least with this particular increase, we're not getting anything new. So everything is just staying status quo. So a little frustrating. I sound so old. 20
Yeah.
years ago, we used to do it this way, but
It's kind of like our streaming service, the arc of our streaming service platforms.
yes. So yeah, I know, right? You pay more for Netflix, and then they are like, "Oh yeah, we're getting rid of all of these series now. You can't watch these movies on Netflix anymore, but you're going to pay us more money for Netflix." So it kind of seems like the story of our lives these days, I guess. Don't mean to pick on Netflix. We can pick on any particular streaming platform. They all do the same thing. All right. I think that's all we've got. Marshall, do you have anything else? Anything we missed? Anything hot off the presses in the last 30 minutes?
No, and nothing on the press. So looking good.
Yay. Well, here's my wish for everybody out there is that there is no news for the rest of the weekend. And maybe next week's live stream can be similarly short. I do wish my family lives in Minnesota, so I do wish everybody up there peace and all good things, and hopefully hopefully there's some end in sight to the horrors that have been happening up there. And I wish y'all, I mean, it's Wednesday, but we're over the hump now. So it's almost the weekend. So wish everybody out there a great weekend and warmth. I think there are a lot of us in a deep freeze. So warmth overwhelmingly. So, all right, y'all, have a great night.